Look at a man's hands, and he's already told you his biography. Mine have a history written in scars, burns, and a faint shadow of motor oil that no amount of pumice stone will ever scrub out of the lifelines. That's the price of spending 30 years pulling dead engines out of rusted steel graves and breathing them back to life. I restore classic cars. I own the acreage they sit on. But to the people sitting across from me tonight, I was just the help. We were 70 floors above Manhattan, dining in a private room where the air smelled of white truffles, ozone, and cold money. I booked it because I wanted this to be perfect. My daughter, Elena, was wearing a midnight blue dress she'd bought after her architectural firm won a major city contract. She was glowing. And sitting next to her was Matteo Rossi, holding her hand with a grip so practiced it looked like something rehearsed in a mirror. Across from them sat Matteo's parents, Vittorio and Isabella. They had flown in from Milan. They carried themselves with that rigid, effortless posture that screams old European money. Isabella wore a heavy string of pearls that caught the dim candlelight, while Vittorio adjusted a silk pocket square with long, immaculate fingers. I poured the Barolo. My knuckles, battered and thick, looked absurd against the fine crystal decanter. Vittorio watched my hands. He didn't say anything, but I saw the micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw, a slight flare of the nostrils, like he'd just stepped in something unpleasant on the sidewalk. "Arthur," Vittorio said, his English draped in a heavy, aristocratic lilt. "Matteo tells us you work with automobiles." "I restore classics," I said, setting the bottle down gently on the white linen. "Ferraris, Alfas, old Porsches. I have a rather large facility out in the valley." Isabella smiled. It was the kind of smile you give a dog that's finally learned a basic trick. "How tactile." Elena shifted, sensing the subtle chill in the room, but Matteo leaned in and kissed her cheek. "Arthur is an artist, Mother. He built an empire from dirt." Elena beamed at him. I smiled, feeling a brief, foolish surge of warmth. It was a good line. Then Vittorio leaned slightly toward his wife, picking up his silver fork. Without missing a beat, he flipped a switch. "Un impero di sporcizia," he murmured in rapid, fluid Milanese Italian. "An empire of dirt. Look at his fingernails, Isabella. We are breaking bread with a peasant." The room didn't drop in temperature, but the blood in my veins turned to absolute ice. I didn't blink. I reached out and slowly picked up my water glass. "A Udala," Isabella replied softly in the same tongue, gracefully sipping her wine. "He is useful." The girl is incredibly naive, a simple stepping stone. Once the papers are signed, we will wash our hands of the mechanic. They both chuckled. A soft, dry sound that barely rattled the crystal. Matteo, the man who had looked me in the eye 3 months ago and promised to cherish my only child, smiled warmly at his parents. "Tranquilli," Matteo said in Italian, tracing his thumb over Elena's knuckles in a sickening display of false affection. "Relax. The old man is clueless. Just keep smiling at him." My heart hammered a slow, violent rhythm against my ribs. The Barolo I just tasted suddenly turned to cold copper in the back of my throat. The ambient hum of the restaurant faded out, leaving nothing but the sound of my own shallow breathing. They thought I was deaf. They thought I was a small-town American grease monkey who only spoke the language of spark plugs and torque wrenches. What Vittorio, Isabella, and Matteo didn't know, couldn't possibly fathom, was that before I ever opened my own shop, I spent 4 brutal years in my 20s working the factory floors of Turin. I didn't learn Italian in some sunlit classroom in Florence. I learned it by getting screamed at by master mechanics until my ears rang. I learned it bleeding over engine blocks until I understood the difference between a slipped gear and a shattered dream. I learned the dirty, guttural slang of the working class, and I learned the polished, poisonous drawl of the executives who came to inspect us. I understood every single syllable they just said. My hand shook, just a fraction of a millimeter. I forced the muscle to lock. Beneath the table, my eyes caught a detail that grounded me. As Vittorio shifted his weight, I saw the heel of his expensive Italian loafer. It was scuffed, worn down to the bare leather, desperately in need of repair. A tiny crack in their golden armor. I looked at my beautiful, brilliant daughter, completely oblivious to the vipers uncoiling around her. I looked at the man holding her hand like she was nothing more than a poker chip. "Everything okay, Arthur?" Vittorio asked in English, wearing a mask of polite concern. I smiled. The kind of warm, empty smile a butcher gives a calf. "Everything is perfect, Vittorio," I said, cutting into my steak with slow, deliberate pressure. "I was just thinking about how much I'm looking forward to this wedding." "Enjoy the wine, Vittorio, because it's the last time you'll ever draw a peaceful breath in my presence." The drive home from Manhattan was a masterclass in suffocating my own instincts. My hands gripped the cracked leather steering wheel of my vintage F-150 so hard my forearms ached, the knuckles bone white in the dim green glow of the dashboard lights. Every passing mile marker on the dark highway screamed at me to slam the brakes, turn the truck around, drag Matteo out of that high-rise by his tailored collar, and end the charade before it went any further. But that's the brutal trap of fatherhood. If I exploded now, armed with nothing but insults spoken in a language I wasn't supposed to comprehend, I wouldn't be Elena's protector. I'd be the jealous, unhinged American mechanic trying to ruin his little girl's fairy tale. She would immediately defend him. They would graciously accept her apologies and cast me as the irrational villain. I had to let them finish building their fragile glass house before I threw the stone. Thursday morning, the Rossis officially moved into the renovated carriage house on my property. They claimed living in a luxury hotel in the city was too sterile, too detached from the rustic charm of the American countryside they were so eager to experience. The absolute truth was something much darker. They needed to be dangerously close to the vault they were trying to rob. I met them out in the gravel driveway, wiping thick black grease onto a stained shop rag, playing my part to the absolute hilt. Matteo stepped out first, adjusting a perfectly tailored linen blazer, flashing me that empty, cinematic smile. He grabbed Elena's hand, kissing it delicately. Vittorio stepped out next, pausing to glance around my sprawling acreage with the hungry, calculating eyes of a starving wolf eyeing a trapped flock. Isabella followed closely behind him, wrapping a thin silk scarf tightly around her throat as if to physically ward off the crisp morning air. "Welcome to the compound," I called out, plastering a wide, foolish grin on my face and offering a calloused hand toward the patriarch. Vittorio took it with obvious physical reluctance. His skin felt unnervingly soft, like bread dough that had been left out on a counter for too long. "Fascinating property, Arthur, though the aromas are quite robust." He meant the faint, permanent smell of high-octane fuel and scorched rubber drifting heavily from the main restoration shop. To me, it smelled like honest, brutal work. To him, it was a filthy offense. "Just wait until I fire up the smoker for dinner tonight," I chuckled, leaning casually against the dented iron fender of my truck. Isabella offered a tight, patronizing smile. As she turned her head toward the carriage house, the morning sun caught the heavy pearl necklace she had worn at the restaurant. Up close, the grand illusion fractured entirely. The ornate clasp resting at the nape of her neck wasn't solid gold. It was cheap, heavy brass, tarnished green at the edges from sweat and desperate age. Add that to Vittorio's scuffed leather soles and the faint, unmistakable odor of mothballs hiding beneath his heavy designer cologne, and the picture was coming into sharp, terrifying focus. These people weren't aristocrats slumming it with the working class. They were drowning. And my daughter was the life raft they intended to sink. That night, long after the carriage house lights finally went dark, I locked myself in my dusty office above the main garage. The stagnant air was thick with the comforting scent of aged paper and dried motor oil. I pulled a prepaid burner phone from the bottom drawer of my heavy oak desk and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 decades. The line clicked, hissing violently with transatlantic static. Pronto. The voice was gravelly, tired, steeped in a lifetime of Turin smog. Domenico. It's Arthur Penhaligon. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the Atlantic Ocean. Arturo. Domenico rasped, the shock melting into a low, rumbling laugh. I thought you were dead. Or worse, living quietly in Florida. I need your eyes, Dom, I stated flatly, staring out the dirty window at the shadowed silhouette of my carriage house. A family from Milan, the Rossis, Vittorio and Isabella. The son is Matteo. They're over here playing royalty, but the edges are fraying. I heard the distinct scratch of a match, the sharp intake of breath as Domenico lit a cigarette. Rossi is a common name, but a Milanese family pretending to be royalty with a son named Matteo? I know the ghosts of that city, Arturo. Give me 48 hours. I don't have 48 hours to spare, I pressed, tracing a permanent grease stain carved into my mahogany desk. My daughter's name is getting mixed into whatever poison they're brewing right now. Dig into their assets, real estate, and check the syndicates. I will flip every stone in Lombardy, Domenico promised. But Arturo, if it is the family I am thinking of. He paused, the silence stretching out like a wire about to snap. You need to prepare yourself. These are not people who stop at stealing. They consume entirely. The line went dead, leaving a hollow dial tone ringing in my ear. I sat alone in the dark for a very long time, listening to the metallic ticking of the cooling engines down in the massive shop below. The temperature in my small office seemed to drop 10 degrees. The anger I had felt in the restaurant was completely gone now, replaced by a cold, mechanical clarity. They thought they were dealing with a gullible fool. They had no idea they had just walked into a locked garage with a man who knows exactly how to take a broken machine completely apart. The burner phone sitting on my scarred mahogany desk felt heavier than a cast-iron engine block. I hadn't slept a single hour in 2 days, surviving entirely on bitter, scorched coffee from the shop downstairs. It tasted like battery acid in the back of my dry throat. I just sat in the dim, suffocating silence of my office, watching pale dust motes dance in the slanted morning sun, waiting for Domenico to call back. The sharp, electronic trill of the phone finally shattered the quiet. I snatched the plastic device before the second ring could even form. You were right, Arturo. Domenico's voice crackled through the terrible connection, sounding older, heavier than before. They are drowning. But it is not a bank pulling them under the water. Give me the exact numbers, Dom, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, stripping away all the forced, folksy warmth I'd been wearing around the carriage house. 12 million euros, Domenico replied. The sheer weight of the number hung in the stale air, heavy and lethal. They leveraged their ancestral estate in Milan 5 years ago, lost every penny in a corrupt importing scheme, and went to the street for a desperate lifeline. The people they owe, they are not the kind who send polite collection letters. They are a brutal syndicate operating out of the Navigli district. They break bones. Then they take everything else you love. I closed my eyes, rubbing the throbbing bridge of my nose, trying to massage away the sudden, blinding headache. 12 million. They weren't trying to steal my commercial property just to live comfortably. They were trying to buy their own lives back from the mob. "There is something much worse, my friend," Domenico warned, his tone dropping to a grim, terrified whisper. I pulled the preliminary shadow ledgers from a contact inside the syndicate's front company. The Rossis recently secured an extension on their debt, a short grace period to deliver the funds. "How?" I asked, my calloused fingers digging into the edge of the mahogany desk until the hard wood physically bit into my skin. "They offered a new guarantor," Domenico said, the words falling like hammer strikes. "An American architectural firm. They provided signed preliminary contracts, promising massive liquidity from an upcoming real estate merger. The signature on the collateral documents, Arturo, it is Elena's." The stagnant air in the room completely vanished. A cold, electric shock ripped violently down my spine, leaving a sharp, metallic taste of pure panic on my tongue. "She hasn't signed anything," I breathed, the desperate words barely making it past my clenched teeth. "She thinks they're just looking at rustic wedding venues in Tuscany. I know her." "Then Matteo forged her name," Domenico stated coldly, stating a fact rather than an opinion. "The syndicate does not care who held the pen, Arturo. As far as the men in Milan are concerned, your daughter is legally tethered to a 12 million euro blood debt. If they default, the syndicate will not come for Vittorio. They will cross the ocean. They will come for Elena." The line clicked dead, returning me to a hollow, echoing dial tone. I lowered the phone slowly, staring blankly at the oil-stained floorboards beneath my work boots. This wasn't a bruised ego anymore. This wasn't some wealthy snobs looking down their noses at a blue-collar mechanic over expensive wine. This was a death sentence draped in a tailored linen suit. I stood up, my knees trembling with a violent, primal rage I hadn't felt since I was brawling in the alleys of Turin. I walked mechanically to the dirty window overlooking the expansive gravel courtyard. Down below, the morning fog was finally burning off. Matteo and Elena were sitting at a small wrought iron patio table outside the carriage house. They were drinking espresso. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her beautiful face bathed in the soft morning light. Matteo smiled at her, reaching over with tender precision to tuck a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. It was a flawless, picture-perfect lie. I focused strictly on the table. Elena had a large roll of architectural blueprints spread out, sketching rapidly with her favorite cobalt blue drafting pen. That was her real signature, sharp, precise, full of life and unyielding integrity. The horrifying image of this parasite meticulously practicing her name, copying those fluid strokes onto a Mafia collateral document while she slept peacefully next to him in bed. My fist slammed into the window frame, hard enough to rattle the glass but not break it. I needed to break him instead. But if I marched down there right now and wrapped my hands around his throat, the police would drag me away, and Elena would still be fatally bound to the syndicate. The white-hot anger slowly calcified into something infinitely colder, harder. A heavy, absolute silence settled over my mind, quieting the storm. I didn't need to just stop the wedding. I needed to trap them entirely in their own snare. I needed to legally sever the tether Matteo had wrapped around my daughter's neck, and I needed to do it publicly, leaving them utterly defenseless against the monsters they were running from. I watched Matteo gently kiss my daughter's forehead, completely unaware of the crosshairs settling directly between his eyes. He had forged her name to save his own life. Now I was going to rewrite his entire future. It took exactly 3 days for the wolves to bring the trap directly to my door. I was elbow deep in the engine bay of a dismantled 1968 Ferrari, 330 GTC, the air thick with the sharp, acidic scent of unburnt hydrocarbons and oxidized metal. The heavy steel wrench in my hand was slick with grease, grounding me in the physical world, while my mind meticulously plotted the absolute destruction of the men walking toward me. Over the low, persistent hum of the fluorescent shop lights, I heard the slow crunch of gravel under expensive leather. Vittorio and Matteo stepped into the cavernous main garage, looking entirely out of place, like they had taken a wrong turn into a subterranean war zone. Vittorio coughed softly, waving a manicured hand in front of his face to clear the imaginary fumes, while Matteo carried a thick, dark leather folder tucked securely under his arm. Through the open bay doors, I could see Isabella standing near the carriage house, watching us with the cold, unblinking focus of a hawk circling a wounded animal. The claustrophobia of their scheme was suffocating. "Arthur," Vittorio called out, his aristocratic voice echoing slightly against the concrete block walls. "Are we interrupting your tinkering?" I slowly straightened up, grabbing a shop rag and wiping the thick black grit from my hands. The metallic tang of adrenaline instantly flooded the back of my dry throat. "Just bringing a dead engine back to life," I replied, tossing the stained rag onto a crowded workbench. "What can I do for you boys?" Matteo stepped forward, projecting that rehearsed, devastating charm. He gently set the leather folder on the edge of my rolling toolbox, right next to a pile of fouled spark plugs. The contrast between the pristine, cream-colored parchment peeking out and the heavy grime of my livelihood was perfectly poetic. "We wanted to speak with you about tradition, Arthur," Matteo began, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an utterly flawless mask of sincerity. In Italy, when two prominent families merge, we establish what is called a familia heritage agreement. It is a gesture of total unity, a blending of assets to ensure the bride and groom are protected for generations. Vittorio nodded sagely, adjusting his silk tie with a practiced flick of his wrist. "It is merely a formality, of course, to show mutual respect. We have already signed our portion in Milan, dedicating our ancestral estate to Elena's future." I stared down at the leather folder. Beneath that heavy, imported cover lay the legal guillotine designed to bleed my commercial empire dry and offer my only daughter as a blood sacrifice to the syndicate. I picked up the document, purposely leaving faint, oily thumbprints on the edges of the pristine pages. I flipped through the heavy stock, staring blankly at the dense paragraphs of legalese. I narrowed my eyes, mouthing a few words silently, forcing my posture to slump into the shape of a man completely out of his depth. The physical effort required to suppress my disgust made me genuinely nauseous. "This is a whole lot of $10 words," I muttered, scratching the back of my neck. "Irrevocable holding transfers. Cross-border collateralizations. I just fix old cars, Vittorio. I don't understand half of what this means." Matteo's rigid shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. A microscopic tell. He truly believed he had me. "It simply means what is ours is Elena's, and what is yours is protected," Matteo assured, his voice dripping with lethal honey. "We can have our attorneys explain it to you in simpler terms if you'd prefer." No, I sighed, tapping the folder against my palm like a gullible fool. "I trust you. But I better have my local guy, old Jim, down at the strip mall, give it a quick read-over. Just to dot the I's and cross the T's, you know. Then we can all sign it together at the big engagement gala on Saturday. Make a real show of it for Elena." Vittorio's eyes instantly lit up. The raw greed pooling in his pupils was so naked it was repulsive. "A public signing at the gala. A brilliant, heartfelt idea, Arthur." They left the garage practically vibrating with premature victory. I watched their tailored silhouettes disappear into the blinding afternoon sun. Then I locked the heavy steel doors of the shop, walked upstairs to my dim office, and scanned the entire document to a high-rise in Manhattan. I didn't use a strip mall lawyer. My attorney is Marcus Sterling, a ruthless corporate apex predator who handles the complex international acquisitions for my $30 million industrial real estate portfolio. 2 hours later, Marcus was on a secure video call, his face pale and remarkably tight, as he read through the hidden clauses. "They aren't just trying to rob you, Arthur," Marcus warned, removing his wire-rimmed glasses. "This clause here, if you sign this, you legally validate the prior preliminary documents. You authenticate Elena's forged signature. You would be wrapping a concrete block around your own daughter's legs and throwing her directly into the Mafia's harbor." "I know," I answered, the absolute coldness in my voice surprising even me. "So we are going to reverse the wiring. I want you to draft a counter document. Keep the cover page. Keep the formatting identical, but change the binding language." Marcus leaned closer to his camera, a predatory gleam slowly appearing in his eyes. "What kind of language?" "The kind that instantly nullifies any prior agreements made in Elena's name," I instructed, my pulse steadying into a slow, mechanical rhythm. "The kind that legally exposes their fraud to the international banking authorities the absolute second their pen leaves the paper. I want a contract that turns their trap into a steel cage." "I can have it ready by Friday," Marcus promised. "But, Arthur, when they read what they are signing, they will panic. It could get highly volatile." "They won't read it," I replied softly, staring down at the oily thumbprints I had purposely left on their trap. "Because I'm going to translate it for them, in front of 400 guests." It took 72 hours to transform the cavernous floor of the Penhaligon Works from a brutal sanctuary of grease and steel into a glittering illusion of high society. My crew and I had pushed the half-restored Ferraris and vintage Jaguars to the perimeter of the shop, their polished chrome acting as mirrors for a sea of linen-draped tables. The cavernous room smelled violently confused, industrial degreaser, warring against the suffocating sweetness of 10,000 imported white lilies. Friday afternoon, Elena stood in the center of the sweeping floor, spinning slowly in her tailored ivory rehearsal dress. The overhead halogens caught the pure, unfiltered joy radiating from her eyes. It was the same look she gave me as a child, when I'd hand her a polished hood ornament like a crown jewel. Now, that absolute devotion was directed entirely at Matteo. He stood beside her, sipping a bitter espresso, wrapping an elegant arm around her waist. His performance was terrifyingly flawless. Every soft smile, every gentle brush of his thumb against her spine, it was a masterclass in predatory patience. A catering vendor approached Elena with a final invoice. She took the battered clipboard, clicked her favorite cobalt blue drafting pen, and dashed her signature across the bottom line. Fluid, sharp, full of authentic life. I watched the dark ink dry, a cold, heavy knot pulling tight in my gut. The Milan syndicate was currently holding a pathetic, traced imitation of those exact strokes. A forgery meant to buy this smiling parasite a few more months of breathing room. Saturday morning. The tension across the compound was thick enough to crack a windshield. Isabella and Vittorio were inspecting the catering setup near the open garage doors. I was standing 15 feet away, concealed in the deep shadows of a towering tool rack, rhythmically tightening the lug nuts on a heavy wheel rim. Isabella picked up a silver frame photograph from the welcome table. It was a picture of me and my late wife, Claire, taken the day we opened this shop. Claire was wearing denim overalls, her beautiful face smudged with motor oil, laughing brightly into the camera. Isabella scoffed softly, wiping her manicured fingers on a silk handkerchief, as if the silver frame itself carried a disease. "Guarda questa contadina," Isabella murmured to Vittorio in rapid Milanese, her voice dripping with venomous, aristocratic pity. "Look at this peasant woman. It is almost poetic, Vittorio. The mechanic's wife dies covered in dirt, and now her daughter will fund our salvation. They are nothing but cattle bred for our slaughter." The heavy steel wrench in my hand suddenly felt entirely weightless. A violent, blinding red heat surged directly behind my eyes. The sharp, metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth, thick and copper bright. I took one half step out of the shadows. The physical urge to swing the heavy wrench into Vittorio's perfect jaw was an overwhelming gravity, my forearms locked, trembling with a primal rage. But then I looked past them. Through the open bay doors, I saw Elena walking across the sunlit courtyard, laughing with her bridesmaids. If I acted now, it would devolve into a chaotic brawl, an ugly scene that would leave the syndicate's debt fully intact and my daughter legally exposed. I stopped. I breathed. I forced my calloused fingers to uncurl from the wrench, one by one. The metal handle was slick with my own cold sweat. Just a few more hours, I told myself, stepping backward into the protective dark. Let them eat the lilies. Sunset arrived. The warehouse filled with 400 guests. The string quartet tuned their instruments, a sharp, dissonant scratching of horsehair on strings that perfectly matched the fraying nerves pulling tight in my chest. Waiters carried trays of expensive champagne, the bubbles fizzing softly in the ambient roar of 100 intersecting conversations. Marcus Sterling arrived exactly on time. He slipped through the massive bay doors like a ghost in a charcoal suit. He didn't speak a single word. He walked past the podium, sliding the thick pages of our weaponized counter-contract into the dark leather folder near the microphone. He caught my eye and gave me a single microscopic nod. The guillotine was loaded. The blade was razor sharp. I watched Vittorio and Isabella holding court near a pristine 1961 Jaguar E-Type, their crystal glasses raised, soaking in the admiration of my local friends and business partners. They looked utterly triumphant. They looked exactly like royalty who had successfully conquered a savage, gullible land. Then, the string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The low murmur of the crowd died down instantly as Vittorio confidently tapped a silver spoon against the thin rim of his champagne glass. The sharp, rhythmic chiming pierced the echoing warehouse. He was calling the room to attention. He was ready to announce his great victory. He had absolutely no idea he was ringing the bell for his own execution. The sharp, rhythmic chiming of Vittorio's silver spoon against crystal echoed off the cavernous steel ceiling of the warehouse. The low hum of 400 guests instantly quieted, turning their expectant faces toward the center podium. I stood in the heavy shadows near a restored Mustang, feeling the cold, familiar weight of a titanium wrench in my pocket, grounding me in the reality of what was about to happen. Vittorio smoothed his silk lapels, his chest swelling with the arrogant pride of a conquering general. "Friends, family," Vittorio projected, his aristocratic English slipping through a sickeningly warm smile. "Tonight we do not just celebrate the union of Matteo and Elena. We celebrate the merging of two distinct worlds. To honor this, we have drafted a Familia Heritage Agreement, a legal blending of our legacy with Arthur's impressive enterprise." He gestured grandly toward the podium where the dark leather folder rested under the blinding halogen spotlight. He was waiting for me to step up, play the bumbling American fool, and sign away my daughter's future. I walked out of the shadows. The air felt unnaturally still, smelling violently of sweet lilies and raw exhaust. I didn't smile. I didn't offer a folksy chuckle. I stepped up to the microphone, the metallic screech of feedback slicing through the tense silence. A blending of legacies, I repeated, my voice flat, broadcasting loudly across the sprawling garage. I looked directly into Vittorio's eyes. That sounds beautiful. But since you traveled all the way from Milan, I thought it only right to honor your true legacy in your native tongue. I leaned into the microphone. The accent I had buried in the brutal factory floors of Turin 25 years ago came out sharp, guttural, and flawlessly working class. Avete pensato che fossi sordo? I snarled, the rapid Italian cutting through the air like a serrated blade. You thought I was deaf. Per 3 settimane avete sputato veleno nella mia casa. Avete insultato mia moglie morta. E pensavate che vi avrei consegnato mia figlia per pagare i vostri debiti di sangue. For 3 weeks you spat poison in my home. You insulted my dead wife. And you thought I would hand over my daughter to pay your blood debts. Vittorio's champagne glass shattered on the concrete floor. The color violently drained from Isabella's face, leaving her looking like a chalk corpse draped in cheap pearls. Matteo scrambled backward, knocking over a linen-draped chair. Arthur, aspetta. Silenzio, I commanded, a bark so loud it bounced off the walls. I switched seamlessly back to English, turning my gaze to the stunned crowd. 12 million euros. That is what the Rossi family owes a violent syndicate operating out of the Navigli district in Milan. They are bankrupt. Their ancestral estate is heavily leveraged, and their time is officially up. A collective gasp rippled through the warehouse. I flipped open the dark leather folder on the podium. 3 days ago, Matteo asked me to sign this heritage agreement to protect Elena, but my lawyers found the hidden clauses. Signing this would have legally validated preliminary documents Matteo had already submitted to the Mafia. Documents where he expertly forged my daughter's signature. Elena staggered as if she'd been physically struck. Her eyes darted from me to Matteo, whose perfectly tailored mask had completely melted into a puddle of terrified, pathetic cowardice. Elena, amore mio, he is lying, Matteo pleaded, his voice cracking, reaching a trembling hand toward her. It was just a business loan. Elena didn't scream. She didn't cry. She reached into her clutch, pulled out her favorite cobalt blue drafting pen, the one she used to build things that actually last, and stared at it. She looked at Matteo's shaking hand, then looked at the dark ink. You forged my name, Elena whispered. The coldness in her voice was so absolute, so entirely my own, it made my chest ache with fierce pride. She calmly pulled the diamond ring off her finger, dropping it directly into Matteo's half-empty espresso cup. It landed with a hollow, pathetic splash. Get out of my shop. Vittorio found his voice, desperate and shrill. You arrogant peasant. You have signed your own death warrant. The contract on this podium is a counterdraft, I interrupted, tapping the heavy parchment. Drafted by my corporate attorneys. The moment I opened it under this spotlight, a live feed triggered the transmission of Domenico's syndicate ledgers to the international banking authorities in Rome. Your fraud is exposed, your accounts are frozen, and the men you owe 12 million euros to, they just found out you failed. Isabella let out a shrill, breathless sob, clutching her tarnished brass necklace. The carriage house is cleared out, I said, gesturing to the massive steel doors where 2 local sheriff deputies I'd quietly hired for security were now stepping forward, handcuffs gleaming under the shop lights. They are going to escort you to the airport. Do not ever return to this country. Nobody spoke as the deputies marched the Rossis out into the dark. The silence they left behind was heavy, but it was finally clean. Elena walked over to me, her ivory dress sweeping across the oil-stained concrete. She didn't look broken. She looked restored. She slid her hand into mine, her delicate fingers wrapping around my grease-stained knuckles. "Thank you, Dad," she murmured, resting her head against my shoulder. "For fixing it." I looked out at the glittering lights of my garage, pulling her close. "Always, sweetheart,"